The humidity hit Nina Hartley the moment she stepped off the plane at Louis Armstrong International Airport. 6 years in Paris had made her forget how New Orleans air felt thick, sweet, and heavy with memory. She tugged at her linen blazer, already feeling the August heat seep through the fabric. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ruby. "Landed yet? Can't wait to squeeze you." Nina smiled despite the knot tightening in her stomach. New Orleans. The city of jazz beignets, and one very specific heartbreak she'd spent 6 years trying to forget. The taxi ride into the French Quarter felt like traveling through a dream she'd once lived. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, chatted about the saints and the latest festival, while Nina pressed her forehead against the window. Every street corner whispered his name. Every jazz club they passed sang his melody. Damien Cross, the man who'd made her believe in love that transcended logic. And the man she'd walked away from when logic demanded it. Ghost in the Garden District, her parents' home in the garden. District looked exactly as she remembered: white columns, wraparound porch, magnolia trees standing guard like ancient sentinels. Ruby burst through the front door before Nina could even pay the driver, her younger sister practically glowing with bridal excitement. Finally, Ruby squealed, wrapping Nina in a hug that smelled of jasmine perfume and happiness. 6 years, Nina. 6 whole years since you've been home." Nina held her sister tight, fighting the emotion rising in her chest. "I'm here now. That's what matters." Inside, the house buzzed with wedding chaos. Fabric swatches covered every surface, and their mother orchestrated everything with the precision of a general commanding troops. But amidst the excitement, Nina felt the weight of unspoken questions. Everyone knew why she'd really stayed away so long. That evening, over sweet tea on the back porch, Ruby finally asked what Nina had been dreading. "It's going to be there." "You know," Ruby spoke softly, watching her sister's face carefully. "Damien, he's catering the reception. His restaurant is the best in the city now." Nina's grip tightened on her glass. "I figured he might be. He's different now," Ruby continued. "Successful, confident. But Jamie says he still has that sad look in his eyes sometimes, especially when someone mentions Paris." The guilt that Nina had carefully packed away for 6 years threatened to spill open. She'd left New Orleans with a scholarship to study architecture in Paris, and she'd left Damien with nothing but a letter explaining that. Sometimes love wasn't enough when dreams pulled you in different directions. She'd been 26, terrified, and convinced that staying would mean giving up everything she'd worked for. "Does he hate me?" Nina whispered. Ruby reached over and squeezed her hand. "He doesn't talk about it." "But no, I don't think Damien could ever hate anyone. That was never his way." The unexpected encounter the next morning. Nina volunteered to pick up the cake samples from the bakery on Magazine Street. She needed air, needed space from the knowing looks and careful conversations. The bakery was tucked between a vintage bookstore and a record shop, the kind of place that made her remember why she'd loved this city once upon a time. She was reaching for the door when it swung open, and suddenly she was face to face with the past. Damien Cross stood there, a box of pastries in one hand, looking like 6 years had only made him more himself. His dark hair was shorter now, touched with gray at the temples. His eyes, those warm brown eyes that used to look at her like she was music made, visible, widened in recognition. Nina. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer, and a wound all at once. "Damien." Her voice came out breathless. "I didn't. I wasn't expecting ... Yeah," cleared his throat, shifting the pastry box. "I'm doing the tasting samples for Ruby. Didn't she tell you?" Of course, Ruby hadn't told her. Her sister probably thought throwing them together was helping somehow. They stood there in the doorway, the summer sun beating down, while the world seemed to hold its breath around them. He looked good, better than good. The boy she'd known had become a man who wore success comfortably, whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. "You look different," he said finally, his tone carefully neutral. "Paris changed you." 6 years changes everyone," Nina replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "True." He nodded, and she caught something flicker across his face. pain, maybe? Or acceptance. I have to get these to the venue. Good to see you, Nina. He moved past her, and the brief moment when their shoulders almost touched sent electricity racing through her body. She turned to watch him walk away, this man she'd loved with everything she had, who now treated her like a pleasant stranger. The weight of what was that night, Nina couldn't sleep. She stood on her childhood bedroom's balcony, looking out over the garden where string lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Somewhere in this city, Damien was probably closing up his restaurant, probably tired from a long day, probably not thinking about her at all. She remembered the last night they'd spent together. They'd been on the levee by the river, the city lights reflecting off the water. She'd already accepted the Paris scholarship but hadn't told him yet. He'd been playing his guitar, making up silly songs about her terrible cooking and her habit of sketching buildings on napkins. He'd looked at her with such complete love that she'd almost changed her mind about everything. I could come with you, he'd said when she finally told him. Paris has music too, but she'd known what that would mean. Him giving up the restaurant he was trying to build. The life he was creating here in the city he loved. She couldn't ask that of him. So instead, she'd made the choice for both of them. Some loves are meant for certain times and places, she'd said, hating herself even as she said it. Maybe we're one of those. His face had crumbled, then carefully reconstructed itself into something harder. Don't write poetry about breaking my heart, Nina. Just break it clean. So she had. And then she'd left. Now, 6 years later, standing under the same stars in the same city, Nina wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Success meant nothing when you were alone in a beautiful apartment in Paris. Scrolling through old photos of someone who'd once been your everything, her phone buzzed. A text from Ruby. Breakfast meeting tomorrow at Damien's restaurant. 9 a.m. Bring your appetite and your courage. Love you, sis, Nina typed back. You're meddling. Ruby's response came immediately. Yes. You're welcome, Nina laughed, despite herself. A sound that held both nervousness and something that might have been hope. Tomorrow, she'd walk into Damien's restaurant, into the life he'd built without her. Tomorrow, she'd face the reality of who they'd become apart. Tonight, though, she let herself remember who they'd been together to young people, who'd believed love could conquer anything. Before the world taught them otherwise, the morning light morning, a ride with typical New Orleans drama thunder clouds rolling in from the lake, the air electric with the promise of rain. Nina dressed carefully in a simple blue dress, her hands trembling slightly as she applied lipstick. It's just breakfast, she told herself. Just a business meeting about Ruby's wedding, but as she drove through the familiar streets toward Damien's restaurant, her heart knew better. This was a reckoning. This was the universe giving her one more chance to face what she'd run from. The restaurant was called Crossroads, and Nina had to admire the poetry of that. It occupied a renovated warehouse in the Bywater neighborhood, all exposed brick and soft lighting. Through the windows, she could see Damien moving between tables. Setting up for the meeting, she sat in her car for a full minute, gathering courage before finally stepping out into the humid morning air. The rain held off, waiting. As she reached for the restaurant door, she caught her reflection in the glass, a successful woman, polished and professional, who'd achieved everything she'd set out to achieve, except happiness, except peace, except love. The door opened before she could touch it. Damien stood there, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Ready? He asked. Nina took a deep breath. Ready? And she stepped inside. The interior of Crossroads took Nina's breath away. Exposed brick walls showcased local art. Warm Edison bulbs created an intimate glow, and everywhere she looked, she saw touches that were purely Damien vintage jazz posters. A small stage in the corner where a piano sat waiting, tables made from reclaimed cypress wood. This wasn't just a restaurant. This was his heart made tangible, Nina. Ruby's voice saved her from the awkward silence. Her sisters sat at a large corner table with their mother, Jamie Way, and the wedding planner. Come sit. Damien's been telling us about the menu options. Nina slid into the only empty chair, which happened to be directly across from where Damien stood. Arms crossed, looking every inch the successful restaurateur. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away. Focusing on the notes in front of him, Damien began, his voice professional but warm for the reception. I'm proposing a fusion menu that honors Ruby's love of traditional Creole cuisine with modern presentation.
Yes.
As he talked through each course, the crawfish etouffee appetizers, the blackened redfish, the bourbon bread pudding, Nina found herself mesmerized. This was his passion made manifest. 6 years ago, he'd been working double shifts at other people's restaurants, dreaming of this moment. And he'd done it. Without her, what do you think, Nina? Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. You've been to so many fine restaurants in Paris. Does this sound sophisticated enough? All eyes turned to her. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It sounds perfect, Nina said honestly. Authentic, but elevated. Ruby, he's going to make your reception unforgettable. Something softened in Damien's expression, there and gone like a whisper. Let's do the tasting then. The taste of memory, what followed was both torture and treasure. Damien brought out dish after dish, each one a masterpiece. But it wasn't just food, it was memory served on fine china. The crawfish etouffee tasted like the festival where they'd first kissed. The jambalaya reminded her of Sunday dinners at his grandmother's house, where she'd been welcomed like family. Each bite was a reminder of what they'd had, what she'd given up, as one Damien said, placing a plate before her personally as new. Grilled oysters with champagne butter and herbs. Thought Ruby might like something elegant for the main course. Their fingers brushed as he set down the plate. The touch lasted only a second, but it sent warmth flooding through her body. She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. Try it, he said softly, and suddenly they weren't talking about oysters anymore. Nina lifted the fork to her lips. The flavors exploded across her tongue, briny, buttery, perfect. Damien, this is incredible, yeah? For a moment, his professional mask slipped, and she saw pride mixed with something vulnerable. I worked on that one for months. Couldn't get the balance right until... He trailed off, but she knew what he wasn't saying. Until recently, until maybe he'd finally stopped being angry enough to create something beautiful again, Jamie, who'd been watching the whole interaction with barely concealed amusement, cleared his throat. So, there's actually something else Ruby wanted to discuss. About the music. Ruby practically bounced in her seat. Yes. Damien, I know you haven't performed in a while, but I would love, absolutely love, if you'd play something at the reception. Just one song. Maybe that one you wrote about? She stopped, realizing what she was about to say. The one he'd written about Nina. The silence at the table grew uncomfortable. Damien's expression shuttered closed. I don't perform anymore, he said flatly. I can arrange for a band, though. Professional musicians who please, Ruby interrupted. Just one song? For me? You played at my high school graduation. You have to play at my wedding, Nina watched. Emotions wore across Damien's face. Finally, he gave a tight nod. One song. I'll choose something appropriate. Forced proximity after the tasting. As everyone was gathering their things, the wedding planner dropped a bomb. Nina, I almost forgot. Your mother mentioned you have experience with design. We're having an issue with the reception space layout. The venue's coordinator quit last week, and we're scrambling. Would you mind going with Damien tomorrow to look at the space? He needs to understand the flow for food service, and we need your eye for aesthetics. Nina and Damien spoke simultaneously. I'm sure someone else that's not really necessary, perfect. The planner beamed, oblivious, or deliberately ignoring their discomfort. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the venue, you two work it out. And just like that, Nina found herself standing outside the restaurant with Damien after everyone else had left. The morning heat finally giving way to the promised rain. The conversation, they stood under the awning, watching sheets of water pour from the sky, neither quite willing to make the first move toward their cars. You don't have to come tomorrow, Damien said finally, not looking at her. I can handle the venue setup alone. I know you can. Nina wrapped her arms around herself. But Ruby wants it perfect, and I'd like to help, would you? Now he did turn to face her, and the carefully controlled emotion in his voice cracked slightly. Or do you just feel obligated? That's not fair. Fair. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair, Nina? You disappeared. 6 years. Not a phone call, not an email. You just vanished into your perfect Paris life while I... He stopped himself, jaw clenched. While you what? Nina asked quietly. While I stayed here and missed you every single day. The words came out raw, unfiltered. Built this whole place trying to fill the space you left. Wrote songs I'll never play. Dated people I couldn't love because they weren't you. Nina felt tears burning in her eyes. Damien, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. You loved New Orleans, and I had this opportunity, and I couldn't ask you to. You didn't ask me anything. His voice rose, years of buried hurt finally surfacing. You decided for both of us. You decided that what we had wasn't strong enough to survive distance or compromise. You decided I wasn't worth fighting for. That's not true. Now, the tears did fall. I left because I loved you too much. Because I couldn't watch you give up your dreams for mine. My dream was you. The anguish in his voice broke something inside her. My dream was building a life together, figuring it out, making it work. But you were so convinced that love meant sacrifice that you sacrificed us instead. The rain pounded around them, and Nina realized they were both crying now. 6 years of unsaid words finally flooding out. I was scared, she whispered. 26 and terrified. I'd never left Louisiana, never been on a plane, never imagined life could be bigger than what I knew. And you were so rooted here, so sure of your path. I thought if I asked you to come, you'd say yes, and then you'd resent me eventually. So I made the choice, before you could. Damien was quiet for a long moment, rain streaming off the awning between them like a curtain separating two worlds. Do you know what the worst part was? He finally said, his voice softer now, exhausted. It wasn't that you left. It was that you didn't trust us enough to try. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth about how scared you were. You just left a letter and disappeared. I know, Nina's voice broke. I know, and I've regretted it every day since. I'm sorry, Damien. I'm so sorry. He wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand. Yeah, me too. The rain began to slow, turning from a downpour to a drizzle. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm went off, breaking the moment. Should go, Nina said. Damien nodded. Tomorrow? 10 a.m. We'll look at the venue, keep it professional, get through this wedding. Then you can go back to Paris, and we can both move on. For real this time, it should have felt like closure. It should have felt like the right thing. But as Nina drove home through the rain-slicked streets, all she felt was hollow. Moving on, she realized, was exactly what she'd been trying to do for 6 years, and it hadn't worked yet. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had washed away more than just humidity. Nina arrived at the venue, a restored plantation house on the outskirts of the city, 10 minutes early. But Damien was already there, leaning against his truck, coffee in hand. He handed her a second cup as she approached. Figured you still take it with too much cream and a little cinnamon. The gesture, small but intimate, made her throat tight. You remember? I remember everything, Nina. That's the problem. They walked the grounds in careful silence, taking measurements, discussing layouts. The venue was stunning grand oaks draped with Spanish moss. A wide veranda perfect for cocktail hour, gardens that seemed to glow in the morning light. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like neutral territory in an undeclared war. The food stations should go here, Damien said, marking spots on his diagram. Flow from the house to the garden. Keep people moving. And if we angle the tables this way, Nina added, sketching quickly, everyone has a view of the oak alley. Ruby loves those trees. They worked efficiently, professionally, almost like strangers who happened to be good at their jobs. But every accidental brush of hands, every moment their eyes met, carried the weight of history, finally standing in the middle of what would be the dance floor. Damien broke. I can't do this. He shoved his hands in his pockets. I can't pretend you're just some wedding vendor I'm coordinating with. It's making me crazy. Nina's heart began to pound. What do you want me to say? The truth. He turned to face her fully. Why did you really come back? Because if it's just for Ruby's wedding, Fine. I can handle 5 days of professionalism. But if there's any other reason, any part of you that came back," because he stopped, as if afraid to finish the sentence. "Because what?" Nina whispered. "Because you missed this. Us. What we had." His voice dropped. "Because maybe, just maybe, Paris wasn't everything you thought it would be." Nina felt the foundation of her carefully constructed life begin to crack. "It wasn't," she admitted. "Paris is beautiful. My work is fulfilling. I have friends, a nice apartment, everything I thought I wanted, but none of it feels like home. None of it feels like ... double quotes, like what? Like when you played guitar at 3 in the morning and made up songs about my terrible coffee. Like Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. Like knowing someone loves you not despite your flaws, but because of them." The words tumbled out now, unstoppable. Like being so sure of someone that you don't need promises or plans. You just need them. Damien's expression softened, but pain still lingered in his eyes. "That's beautiful, Nina. Really? But it doesn't change what happened. You left. I stayed. We're different people now, are we?" She stepped closer. "Because standing here, I feel exactly the same. Terrified and hopeful and completely in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them. "Don't," Damien said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't say that unless you mean it. Unless you're prepared to what?" "Stay." Nina laughed, but it came out shaky. "I don't know if I can stay. My job, my visa, my whole life is in Paris. But I do know that leaving you once nearly broke me. I don't know if I can do it again." The kiss, he closed the distance between them in 2 steps, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Tell me to stop. Tell me we can't go backwards." But Nina was done running from what she felt. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. The world tilted. 6 years dissolved. His lips against hers felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. He kissed her back with 6 years of longing, of missed opportunities, of words left unsaid. His hands tangled in her hair, and she gripped his shirt, afraid that if she let go, this moment would prove to be just another dream. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Damien pressed his forehead against hers. "We're idiots," he murmured. "Complete idiots," she agreed. "This doesn't solve anything. You have to leave." "I can't leave. We're right back where we started." "No," Nina said firmly. "We're not. Because this time, we're talking. This time we trust each other enough to try." The wedding to Ruby's wedding day arrived in a blur of flowers, music, and controlled chaos. Nina helped her sister into her gown, pinned back stray curls, and tried not to let her own emotional turmoil show. "You're glowing," Ruby said, studying her sister's reflection in the mirror. "Something happened. It's your wedding day." "We're not talking about me, Nina Hartley. I'm getting married. Not going blind." "You and Damien finally talked, didn't you?" Nina bit her lip, then nodded. "We kissed." Ruby squealed, earning a stern look from their mother across the room. "And," she whispered urgently, "and we still have impossible logistics. But we're trying. Really trying this time." The ceremony was beautiful, as exchanged under the oaks. Love declared in front of everyone who mattered. Nina stood beside her sister, watching her marry the man she loved, and felt both joy and envy in equal measure. The reception was everything Ruby had dreamed. The food was spectacular. People danced under string lights, and the air buzzed with happiness. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Jamie took the microphone and announced that Damien would be performing. Nina's breath caught as Damien walked to the small stage, its guitar in hand. He looked nervous, more vulnerable than she'd seen him in days. His eyes found hers in the crowd and held. "This is for Ruby and Tom," he said into the microphone. "But it's also for everyone who's ever been brave enough to fight for love, even when it's complicated. Even when it's scary." He began to play, and Nina recognized the opening chords immediately. It was the song he'd written for her 6 years ago, the one she'd only heard once, the night before she left. But the lyrics were different now, not about losing love, but about finding it again, 6 years of silence couldn't kill this flame. 6 years of distance, but the love's the same. I built these walls. You crossed the miles. Now, we're standing here, remembering how to smile. Tears streamed down Nina's face as he sang. Around her, people swayed, caught up in the emotion. But Damien never looked away from her, pouring everything into every word. When the last note faded, the crowd erupted in applause. But Nina was already moving, pushing through people until she reached the stage. "That was our song," she said when she got close enough. "You changed it, had to." He set down the guitar and stepped down to her level. The old version was about goodbye. This one's about hello, Damien. She took his hands. "I don't have all the answers. I don't know exactly how we make this work, but I know I want to try. I'll come back and forth. We'll video call every day. I'll look for architecture firms here, maybe open my own eventually. It won't be easy," but he silenced her with a kiss. Right there in front of everyone, in front of her family and his friends and the whole celebrating crowd. "We'll figure it out," he said against her lips. That's what people do when they love each other. They figure it out. 3 months later, Nina stood in the apartment above Crossroads. The one Damien had converted into a combination home office and design studio. Her laptop sat open on the desk, connected to her Paris office for morning meetings. But the walls displayed sketches of her latest project, a renovation plan for expanding. It's Damien's restaurant. She'd made a choice, but not the same choice as before. She hadn't given up Paris entirely or demanded Damien leave New Orleans. Instead, they'd created something new, a life, split between 2 cities, between 2 dreams that were learning to coexist. She spent 2 months in Paris, 1 month here. It wasn't perfect. There were lonely nights and difficult conversations and moments when the distance felt impossible. But there were also video calls at strange hours, surprise visits, and a growing collection of plane tickets that told the story of love that refused to quit. The restaurant door chimed below. She heard Damien's voice calling up the stairs. "Nina, you up there?" "Always," she called back, smiling. He appeared in the doorway, flour dusting his shirt from the day's work. But his eyes were bright, happy in a way she remembered from 6 years ago. "How was Paris?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Productive, cold, missing you." She kissed him softly. "How's New Orleans?" "Hot, busy, not the same without you." He kissed her back. "But I've got you for 4 whole weeks this time." "Actually," Nina said, pulling back slightly, a nervous excitement in her voice, "I've been thinking, what if I made it 2 months here, 1 month there? I talked to my bosses, and they're open to me running the U.S. expansion remotely. It would mean more time here? With me?" His grin was brilliant. "Woman, are you trying to make me the happiest man in Louisiana?" "Just Louisiana? Aim higher, Cross?" He laughed and spun her around the small room. When he set her down, his expression turned serious. "I know this isn't the traditional happy ending. No one's giving up their dreams or making grand sacrifices." "No," Nina agreed. "But maybe that's better. Maybe the best love isn't about sacrifice. It's about expansion. It's making room for each other's dreams alongside our own." "Look at you, getting all philosophical." But his voice was soft with emotion. "I love you, Nina Hartley. Paris, New Orleans, or anywhere in between. I love you too," she whispered back. "And this time, I'm not running." Outside, the New Orleans evening was coming alive with music drifting up from the street, the smell of jasmine on the humid air, and the promise of another night in the city that had brought them together, pulled them apart, and finally taught them that real love doesn't demand you choose between your heart and your dreams. It asks you to be brave enough to reach for both.